blows my eye holes and fills me with real power. Fills me with real power.
The overpowered protagonist is a trope that's currently on the rise, especially in the anime community over the last 10 years or so. It's become a staple in the shonen demographic, but it has its history across the board. It's become ridiculously popular in light novels and manga as well. I don't think we can fairly state that this is some sort of new feature in storytelling mechanics, but the ways I've seen it utilized in anime and anime-like media definitely feels like a newer twist. I've noticed more stories implicitly assuming that we've already seen and are familiar with these types of tropes or mechanics before we even start the series. There's just been a spike within the last decade of stories that are more unabashed in their presentation of characters that frankly just won't lose. It's hard to always distinguish it from the devices of power fantasies, but I do want to start off by acknowledging there is a difference. Power fantasies are usually fantasy series that focus on the journey of an unsuspecting character attaining strength, success, power, and the many rewards that result from those advancements. Power fantasies as a genre or style of story more often than not lead to an overpowered main character. Sometimes it's through the progression of the story that motivates the main character to go further and maximize their capabilities beyond anyone's expectations. And sometimes it's just through the character's response to the stakes or threats at hand. But whether a power fantasy leads to an overpowered main character or not, they are separate ideas. They just have sort of a symbiotic relationship. The end results of these advancements are usually a character who is pretty much unstoppable. But even in the mechanisms of the search for power, a lot of stories end up underdeveloping the types of adversities that the main character faces, or the reasons they still face adversity even though they're so powerful. Some series definitely do try to at least distinguish some of the factors leading up to the conflict so that it doesn't always feel like the main character wins easily. But again, I feel like that's becoming a lot less common, specifically in the stories with the most visibility. I'm an animation fan, so obviously I'm going to talk a lot about anime and cartoons, but I don't think it's only limited to those stories. It's just become so prominent at this point. Mother's Basement has a great video on the topic that highlights some of the key early figures and series in anime that included a lot of these elements that would later form the tropes. It starts with series like Astro Boy and Devilman, and by the time we get to the first golden age of manga, we're seeing series that are largely formed around their mechanics of acquiring power and wish fulfillment, like Kinnikuman, Dragon Ball, Sailor Moon, etc. Jump to present day, and we now have multiple series in genre that are created with the prerequisite that the hero is unbeatable, sidestepping or at least undermining the power acquisition framework altogether. And I don't think it's a coincidence that these are the stories with the biggest budgets and highest demand. Similarly, I think these elements have become more prevalent in the West with the latest resurgence of comic book IP in superhero media. Since the inception of Superman, we've read, heard, and seen many stories that have tried to flip the concept of an unbeatable hero. In fact, I recently came in contact with one of my personal favorite Dark Superman stories, just digging through some of my parents' old DVDs.
And I can smell that liquor on your breath.
I've been drinking, bitch.
So how did we get here? We get here because I wanted to talk about two characters, and one of them a little more than the other. I've had to rewrite this one about 3 or 4 times because, I don't know, I'm indecisive, lol. But also largely because since I started writing this video and put it on the list of things I wanted to talk about, other videos came out that I think do a better job at talking about the history, issues, and things to learn from stories that use these ideas. Check out Hello Future Me and Mother's Basement, they do a great job. But what I would like to do is take this time to highlight 2 stories that I think do a very interesting job at navigating these kinds of stories and how they do so in a way that doesn't feel as much as a subversion, but rather an alternative framework to this concept. Avatar Yangchen is a criminally underreported character within the Atlaverse, but given the circumstances of her story, it's understandable. First things first, she has all of 3 lines in the OG Atla series, so that being the case, it's always going to be hard to beguile an audience when you're already in a sea of attention-grabbing characters. The rest of her character can be found minorly in the second Kyoshi book, The Rise of Kyoshi, and then more concretely in Yangchen's own 2-part novel series. And as TikTok and all these other news outlets are really excited to tell us, people can't read, so the Yangchen stocks are down and I don't know if they're gonna recover. I'm not gonna hold you, I'm a little scared about what they're gonna do in a live action.
Hop on one leg.
For those that don't know anything about her, Yangchen is an empathetic, childish, and meticulous protagonist. She's all of those things and more, but she has this particular brand of stoicism that was really engaging to me as a reader. It's not the same type of stoicism that gets those weird, sad AMV edits. It's a stoicism that's brought on by both her intimate knowledge of conflicts of the past, as well as from the physical power and authority that she holds as an avatar who's mastered all 4 elements by her late teens. That specific stoicism offered a pace and perspective that decentralized her physical capabilities and centered some more sentimental ideas, which of course reminded me of another all-powerful hero from a different series. I think both of these characters serve as very interesting forms of overpowered main characters without falling into the murky waters of wish fulfillment or forcing them into really static moral dilemmas. Of course, there are moral dilemmas present, but it's not like a trolley problem every 5 minutes. I also think it's worthwhile to note that although both series do focus on the emotional and social growth of the characters, neither series leans so overtly into the mental or psychological horrors and traumas of having these great powers. It feels like so many stories assume that there's a set way for a character to act when they hold all of this power. That because they're all powerful, inhibitions and angst no longer exist. If you couldn't tell, I'm watching Solo Leveling, y'all, so it's literally at the top of my mind. But it's a good example of how it's automatically assumed that strength cures all insecurities. And since that strength sets the main character apart from all the people that care about them, then the logical next step is that they either want to protect those people or they grow to think less of them. But what if they just wanted to spend time with the people they care about and to be remembered by them as well? Why wouldn't they want to know what their friends or what the world will think about them as time carries on? Yangchen and Frieren's stories set out to answer those questions. So that being the case, I decided to reflect on the similar feeling I got from both of their stories, as well as offer a bit of character analysis for your girl Yangchen. So just a heads up, this will be a discussion of the themes and character building moments from the books The Dawn of Yangchen and The Legacy of Yangchen. There will be some mild spoilers, but I aim to keep this as spoiler free as possible. You can expect to hear location names and much of the background information to set the scene of the Atla world at this time, but I will refrain from giving you guys much of anything from the main plot points. That being said, I will be discussing a lot of the details around Yangchen's backstory and all, so you have been warned.
You're fighting so you can watch everyone around you die. Think, Mark! You'll outlast every fragile, insignificant being on this planet. You'll live to see this world crumble to dust and blow away. Everyone and everything you know will be gone. What will you have after 500 years?
You understand, Frieren. Your path in life has not been easy. For no one to remember everything you've done is painful and cruel. Everyone else who knew of my righteous triumphs, my acts of justice, they're long gone.
Being remembered is something we all selfishly desire.
You're right. It's no matter. Tell me about your life, and I'll tell you about mine.
It's my wisdom for you. Selfless duty calls you to sacrifice your own spiritual needs and do whatever it takes to protect the world.
Yangchen was raised in the Western Air Temple with her close sister Jetsun. From an early age, Yangchen could hear the voices of avatars before her, and it led to a lot of distress and illness. As a kid, Yangchen would slip in and out of rambling fits that read almost like a child that dealt with constant seizures. At first, the ramblings were completely incoherent, but over time, words formed, and eventually those words became full sentences. When in these fits, those sentences were farewells to old friends or request mates to kings who ruled centuries ago. Yangchen would also slip into the avatar state as she was possessed by the thoughts and emotions of the avatars before her. Building on an element that we had seen implicitly between The Last Airbender and Korra, Yangchen being an airbender seems to play a part in her innate spirituality, and she grows up having to deal with the difficulties of managing it. As a result, she's constantly relived the experiences of her past lives, and because of that, Yangchen and her caretakers knew she was the avatar much earlier than her 16th birthday. The outbreaks didn't stop as she got older, although she didn't always have the same convulsions or fever-like symptoms. There are a few scenes within the books that allude to her routinely having vivid nightmares. Nightmares so vivid that she often doesn't remember where she is or who she is immediately after waking up. For most people, I think this would make them an anxious wreck, but for Yangchen, it's led her to be vigilant. As for the world we're dropped into, the Yangchen books are set somewhere over 400 years before the main series, and about 100 years before the start of the Kyoshi novels. Here we have a world that is marred by the aftermaths of a near international conflict between the Earth Kingdom, Fire Nation, and Water Tribes, the inciting incident being something called the Platinum Affair. To briefly summarize, while the Earth Kingdom was in the midst of a long civil war, the surrounding nations decided to support the seceding party under the table. They would send platinum and gold to the Earth King, but send weapons and reinforcements to the rebelling factions. Eventually, this relationship was brought to light as the Earth King's forces turned the tides in the war. The result of this would be the Earth Kingdom ran by Earth King Fei Shan stopping all trade with the other nations and effectively blocking all trade routes through the Earth Kingdom. Seeing where this was headed, the nations lobbied for a more diplomatic solution. So instead, 4 cities were set up as the sole points of international trade as the world entered into a period of steep isolationism. I personally really liked this setup for the Atla world. It reminded me a lot of the many warring states periods of China, but it also gave me vibes of the Cold War and some post-colonial African history. I don't know what it is exactly, but there is something really fascinating about setting up a story after the defining conflict has already taken place. It forces you to dig a little deeper into the attitudes and reactions of every character you meet, and it puts the quote-unquote plot in the back of your mind for just a little bit. If you've read or watched Frieren, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Thank you for your diligence, Miss Frieren. You've ensured that time will never get the better of the statue again.
Oh, I nearly forgot. Well, shall we be off?
You have our wholehearted thanks for defeating the Demon King. Your efforts have launched our world into an age of prosperity and peace. Himmel the hero, Eisen the warrior, Heiter the priest, and Frieren the mage.
In case you haven't seen it, Frieren Beyond Journey's End is a story that follows Frieren, the former mage of Himmel the hero's adventuring party. Episode 1 begins with the hero's victory ringing throughout the streets of the town. After the celebrations from their victory, the party disbands and doesn't reconvene for another 50 years. Frieren, the titular character, is an elf, and she's lived over 1,000 years. To her, 50 years isn't that significant, but she's surprised to find her party members are all much older and close to the ends of their times. As the story pans out, she starts to regret not having gotten to know her party members better in those 10 years, and going forward, Frieren decides that she wants to change, as she wants to learn more about humans and build better emotional bonds with them. Similarly to Yangchen's story, this series is set after the heroes triumphed against the Demon King. That was the world's major conflict. Now, Frieren as a series uses that previous conflict's journey as a way to contextualize the present and vice versa. The use of flashbacks, clear foreshadowing, and mirroring of characters allows for the viewer to both enjoy the story playing out in the present, while appreciating and learning about the characters and the world that was in their first journey. It's like you're reading 2 stories at once. In Frieren's story, it's her knowledge of the past and experience with time that creates a strange relationship with the concept of legacy.
Listen to me, Frieren. You must never seek to leave your mark on history. There's safety in obscurity. And once you've finally defeated the Demon King, rest assured the whole world shall know your name.
Just by virtue of her lifespan, Frieren's temperament towards her goals is always going to be hard for her companions to grasp. And there are some smaller but similar conflicts within the Yangchen books around the extra steps Yangchen is willing to take to solve a problem. Both characters have to deal with the task of bettering the world when they have a wider perspective than the characters around them. I like to think about it as one millennium-long lifespan versus a millennium's worth of information spread across different lives. And it's really interesting seeing the similarities and differences between the two.
Pride is not the opposite of shame, but its source. True humility is the only antidote to shame.
Well, my life has been...
Pride, or the lack of it, isolation, impermanence, the relationship a character has with these factors can greatly shape a narrative. Naturally, these are very strong motivators, and individually they're common devices or triggers for the pursuit of power. But when you already have power, the focus shifts from what those factors make a character do, to how those factors make a character feel about themselves and the world around them. When it comes to Frieren, I think the best example of this is within Frieren and Heiter's relationship. Within the story, there are more than a few moments that the series flashes back to that establishes Frieren's feelings about things through one of her old party members' reactions to those factors. So for example, in the beginning of the story we have Heiter, who is one of Frieren's friends from her original journey. Heiter is the priest of their group, and through the various flashbacks that we had seen up until this point, they are quick to point out his drinking problem and how it contradicts his position as a holy man. Despite this though, he is genuinely a kind man, and at least as far as we've seen, it doesn't stop him from continuing to walk within his faith. Once again, it's actually pretty symbiotic. After the death of Himmel the hero, Frieren is met with new emotions and feelings of loss that she had never experienced before. And it's there that she vows to continue her travels and work to connect with people on a deeper level than she had been doing previously. After Himmel's funeral, Haiter recognizes that this might be the last time that he sees the rest of his party, so he takes one last look at them and nonchalantly expresses that if they ever find time to visit the holy city, they should go and make libations at his grave, which prompts Frieren to ask,
Does the thought of dying not cause you any fear?
We're the party of adventurers that saved the world. I'd like to think our seats in heaven have long been reserved.
The story has a very deliberate but casual depiction of its characters' evolving disposition. At the funeral, the members of the heroes' parties are all coming to terms with either their own mortality or the mortalities of their friends, and this moment acts as a domino effect for the rest of the series. Later on in the episode, and years later in their world, Frieren returns to visit Haiter, and she's surprised to find that he's still alive, but she's also surprised to find that he's taken on an apprentice. In his own moments, he's had to wrestle with the ideas of what he would do after Himmel's passing, and in that he's tried to impact the world once more by taking care of someone who needs care. As the episode goes on, he tasks Frieren with training his apprentice named Fern, and through Frieren's relationship with Fern, we get to see how Haiter's actions and how his struggle with what he'll leave behind affects Frieren. It's one small example, but this act that Haiter does eventually leads Frieren into adopting Fern as her apprentice, which then continues to reverberate through Frieren's life.
Kind girl.
Frieren gets to know someone on a more emotional level, seeing them from childhood into young adulthood over the course of the series, and at many points in the story, Fern becomes a portal for Frieren to reflect on her own legacy as a mage, as a mentor, and as a friend.
What is it?
I'm just forming a memory, something of you to carry with me into the future.
Now, there are a bunch of differences that come to mind once you start to compare both characters and their stories. And some differences are more important than others. Like, a lot of these are just due to the structural differences in their world. In Frieren's story, Frieren is effectively all-powerful. We haven't been given many reasons to believe she'll ever lose a fight. On top of that, the magic in their universe is so elastic, it makes it hard to even contemplate many ways for Frieren to be outmatched. When it comes to Avatar, the magic of bending is a bit more restricted, and the concept of the Avatar itself has its limitations. They've only got that one lifespan. We've known that the Avatar can get packed up since episode 12 of the original series. We even saw it in season 2. So as we're going into different situations with Yangchen, the tension is naturally a little bit higher. On the other hand, Frieren's long lifespan is crucial to her story. Her sense of time and the pace that she moves through the story with is very specific to her. Frieren gets to approach different circumstances with a calm head and with the prerequisite knowledge that you would need to tackle these situations. It's one of the luxuries of having so much time. Add to that the fact that the Avatar is a position of power, or at least something similar, because every decision Aang, Korra, or Yangchen make has to be filtered through those duties that they have to serve the people. But since Frieren's journey is pretty much boundless, the only thing that changes the level of urgency that they approach each situation with are what's at stake and their own personal motivation to get to the next destination. Now, one of the key differences I want to focus on in the Yangchen series is that in her story, the hero didn't win the previous conflict. The hero wasn't old enough to have much of an effect on the outcome at all. So instead of the prolonged era of peace that we see in Frieren's world that gurneys a lot of the exposition and characterization that we get, the Atla world is stuck in this liminal period with so many people waiting for that other shoe to drop. And of course, when there's a deadlock like this, up springs opportunists looking to grab power.
Despite the climate of political hostility, Earth King Facian and his court still liked Fire Nation pepper and Water Tribe lamp oil. There was still money to be made exporting fine Umashu silk. So, in a face-saving handshake between King, Chief, and Lord, a few cities were chosen to handle controlled amounts of international trade under the strict purview of selected noble and merchant families. These people became known as Shangs. Each Shang city has an elected officer called a Zongdu, who is responsible for solving problems and collecting customs revenue on behalf of their respective nations. A Zongdu serves for a few years at most before they step down and are replaced by another. In a way, they are avatars, Sidao said, a clever analogy and another slight to Yangchen and her past lives.
So in the Yangchen series, the Zongdu pretty much acts as the mayor of the trade cities for a short period of time. Maybe less like a mayor and more like a comptroller, but they are recommended by other local elites called Shangs to oversee trade and budgeting for a few years, and the Zongdus themselves hope to maintain those trade relationships after they leave the position. I just want you to try and imagine the temptations that will be right under the nose of someone who's selected to fulfill this role. The pressure they'd feel to keep the wealthy elites happy by passing the correct trade agreements. Yeah, there's a serious need for segregation of duties here. And if you couldn't already guess it, pretty much all of the major conflicts trace back to the growing instability and poverty inside the trade cities. Due to the strict rules placed on trade after the Platinum Affair, there was an increased pressure on the working class in all three of the nations involved. Since these were the only places where transactions could take place, it pretty much overhauled millions of lives overnight. Each of these cities had become something of a beacon for people who wished to migrate from their birth nations in hope of making a living. What's more unfortunate is that the leaders of the cities, in practice, answer to no one. They are wary of breaking the rules outlined by the Earth King, and they have incentives and quotas to report back to the leaders of their nations, but there's no real oversight. The only party that really could check them is the Avatar.
Amid the half-ring of stunned people, Yangchen saw the person who had thrown the jug. It wasn't a young miscreant. It was a man who was the same age as her guardian Boma, if not older. She could read the fear and bitterness in his eyes like a scroll. What help? You up there and us down here. What help? It didn't matter that as an air nomad, she owned fewer possessions than anyone here. She had freedom. She had status, the most status in fact. More status than anyone else in the world. Even the most fervent believers in the Avatar would realize she was a brief breeze on a scorched day, pleasant for a moment, but ultimately meaningless.
One of the underlying themes of the Yangchen books is the role pressure plays on people's decisions. Cultural pressures, ethical pressures, historical pressures, Yangchen and pretty much all of the major players in the series battle with and indulge in the weight of the roles they're expected to fulfill. It's a great issue in this extension of the series because of the way societal norms constrict them. Yangchen is around 18 years old, and as I said before, we get to follow a full-fledged Avatar, something that we haven't quite seen as intimately before in the Atlaverse. And we see how much more suffocating the day-to-day duties of a fully realized Avatar are, as opposed to the fun travel journey of Atla or the democratizing developments of The Legend of Korra. In one of the books, Yangchen tells a story to one of her companions about the battle she had with the spirit General Old Iron, a battle mentioned in the Rift comics, and she talks about how powerful and graceful she felt in the moment after she defeated the spirit. But it was the aftermath of that battle that really changed her outlook on her role as the Avatar. She was responsible for relocating the displaced villagers, and she then found out it didn't matter how strong she was, it didn't matter how much she begged or pleaded, no other local towns were going to take them in. It wasn't until she started lying and manipulating officials and people in power that she could get the citizens of the towns relocated. Despite Yangchen having to sacrifice her own moral and cultural dignity as an airbender to get the refugees sheltered, the event is still told as how the Avatar failed to stop a spirit from destroying a town. It's recontextualized in this story to be in direct opposition to her moral tenets as an air nomad and quite literally as her loss of innocence. Throughout the book, she sees how the tasks that she wants to accomplish are stifled by fear, greed, and the individual error of others, and all of these other worldly affairs that are out of her control. She spends a lot of her time finding ways to get the most favorable results with the least amount of blood spilled, even though in many cases a "because I said so" from the most powerful bender in the world should suffice. But it was always clear that the powers that be don't value the lives of the lay people as highly as their own pursuits. The other characters that are in positions of power are so caught up on their focus or fears around legacy and status that, in light of Yangchen's knowledge of years past, seem absolutely ridiculous. And because of that, the lay people will always lose if things escalate past diplomacy. The juxtaposition of Yangchen's sacrifice of her own culture for the needs of others is very effectively paralleled in the story by showing how her socio-political endeavors conflict with her own dealings with the spirits like General Old Iron. She'll boldly tell a lie to a spirit and then boldly lie to a king if that means lives are saved. It's a very interesting distinction to be made, considering how the very concept of the Avatar is intrinsically tied to the individual Avatar's legacy. How great an Avatar was can only be said by those who remembered and chronicled their deeds, whereas the guilt and negative emotions around the Avatar's shortcomings can and is passed down to the next person in the cycle. just as the onlookers passed down Yangchen's failure to stop a spirit. The shame that comes with an oversight or a miscalculation is eternal. Now, it's not to say that that's the sole motivation for Yangchen, but it does offer us an explanation for why she would give Aang the advice that she gives in the finale of the main series.
Many great and wise air nomads have detached themselves and achieved spiritual enlightenment. But the Avatar can never do it, because your sole duty is to the world.
To be remembered as a great Avatar is to not be remembered for your faults. And because faults are subjective, in Yangchen's eyes, there is no personal virtue strong enough to permit the Avatar to spare a genocidal tyrant. Controversially, and in the least spoilery way possible, the antagonist of the Yangchen novels is a person who cares so much less about those social pressures. They are a person who's found themselves in a position to seize wealth and status for themselves, and in fact, they are making decisions without the discretion that would be needed when weighing the ethics or the social appropriateness of the actions that they're taking. And it's not a frantic floundering for the crumbs that can be siphoned off of the other powerful players on the board. It's a cold, calculated, impersonal level of tact. It's like they don't respect the status of the Avatar, so therefore they are irreverent towards the power that the Avatar actually holds, both politically and physically. And that puts Yangchen at a disadvantage.
At first, I was overwhelmed by the noise of it all. The sheer quantity of information you have to sift through to find something relevant. Do you know what I learned? Their lives are full of regret. Lost chances to make the world a better place. To me, that's what sticks out sharpest in their memories. Their regrets over the times they did nothing. I have felt the shame of avatars gone by, lived through failures not recorded in history. And I can tell you with absolute certainty, not a single one of my past selves that I've connected with wishes they waited longer to solve a problem.
What's your motivation for helping people, Himmel?
Tough question. Speaking frankly, I might do it for me. So that when I leave this world, my name lives on in the hearts of the people I impacted. That's why we're here after all. For to live is to be known, to live is to be remembered.
What's this statue?
Don't they look just like us? According to the chief, these guys were a duo of ancient heroes, but nobody I talk to remembers their names. We won't end up like that, though. Our legend won't be an easy one to forget.
Personality-wise, Yangchen is a supremely confident yet humble character, a very quiet confidence, which I think is in some part due to her culture, or at least the hyper-collectivist vibe we get from the Airbenders. She almost always backs herself to solve an issue and meets things head on, which already separates her from Aang and Roku, but she isn't as hot-headed or stubborn as Korra. Yangchen's self-esteem and confidence already separates her from Kyoshi, but she's also a bit more mature overall, and a bit better at self-regulating than the previous teenage avatars. I wanted to mention this specifically because there's a pretty strong notion that Yangchen doesn't have much of a character in these books, and I will say that her perspective isn't always at the forefront, especially in the first book, which was a bit disappointing, but as a character, we get to see so much emotional complexity from her. Many series focus heavily on the hero's call to action and their struggle with living up to their new status, but for Yangchen there was never a call, she just was. The title of Avatar was just another layer to Yangchen the character. The story chooses to present Yangchen as a symbol and then humanizes her by centralizing her disposition towards others rather than her restrictions or obligations. And I think Frieren's story does something similar, as one of Frieren's mentors in the past urges her to focus on not making her mark in history, which gives the story the room to explore her unique experience of humankind. And for me, as an adult, it's so much more relatable to see someone who's actively gaining perspective on themselves by reflecting on the past. Both of these characters are actively choosing to help people in the present, and at the same time they're acknowledging the fact that they still need to grow in certain ways. On the surface, Frieren is also aloof, and depending on what's in front of her, she can either be very modest or she can be carefree and easygoing. And the book describes Yangchen as pretty similar. I don't know where I heard it mentioned before. I think it was on an Avatar related podcast or something, but I really like how the Atla books have kept up with finding ways to include a bit of silliness when it comes to the air nomads. Yangchen isn't always as goofy as Gyatso or like Milo, but I don't think she's far from them. I do think though, because Yangchen spends so much of the time that she's on page doing official avatar duties, the times where she's talking trash to people she be in airball or rolled up like a potato in her robes get overlooked pretty easily. If I didn't say this before, this is the most political and world building focused story in the Atlaverse, so for some, I can see how it might have felt like a drag to read about the socioeconomic situations in the trade cities and the religious ways of the air nomads, but I think some of these inclusions were really cool, and it actually gave us a way to differentiate what it looks like when we're seeing one central incident in Korra or Aang's life, as opposed to a more worldly affair where several political powers are affecting one another's decisions. For Yangchen, she takes her duty as the political arbiter seriously, as she's constantly reminded of the stories and the failures of the avatars before her, and it's also led her to be a lot less attached to the poise or dignity that's expected of someone in her position. Not to say that she doesn't present with poise or dignity, it's just very clearly a performance.
I've heard a seasoned mage lives somewhere in these woods. Is that mage you?
Seasoned in the sense I've been around, perhaps, but I've done precious little with my years. I'm in no way exceptional.
The main reason I wanted to make this comparison is because when watching Frieren for the first time, I did feel a bit of a likeness between her and Yangchen. Maybe I'm reaching, but I felt like there was a shared connection and that there was this commitment to doing for the world and doing for people beyond the constructed lines that divide them. I think similar things drive them as powerful influences in a world that will continue to grow more and more individualistic by the era. What brings me to rereading Yangchen's story is how it focuses on blurring the lines of the individual virtues versus the societal needs, and she lives with that tug of war at the forefront of her mind, while in Frieren's journey, it shows her identifying and implementing the need for discretion between individual and social factors. Where Frieren's power, experiences, and lifespan allows her to experience the world differently, Yangchen's power, culture, and status forces her to approach conflict differently. These two, as an all-powerful nun and a millennium-age elf, can move through the world above the nefarious motivators that contribute to most characters' downfall, and without the flat or one-dimensional motivators that we normally see with characters that are this powerful. So I want to give a little bit of background on how this video got put together. I originally wrote the script, or what I used as the skeleton for the script, about 3 years ago. I think around the time the first Yangchen book came out. I was at home reading it and then listening to other people's thoughts on podcasts and YouTube videos. And before I knew it, there I was screaming to no one about how they missed all these elements about the characters and the political intrigue and blah blah blah. So I wrote this huge thing with all my thoughts and left it there. And then around last July, I picked it up and thought maybe I should turn this into a video or something. I wanted it to be somewhat of a companion piece to Johnny Tuccello's old Avatar book recap videos and just be more of like a review overall to hopefully drum up some more fanfare around the books because they're legitimately worthwhile. I think I first drafted that up in July of 2024, but the Urkel video and life just pushed this way down the priority list. And then as I read that version of the script again around the holidays, I felt like I could see a lot of comparisons to Frieren. I was watching Frieren for the first time then, and I thought, okay, maybe I can make this a comparison piece between the two protagonists, and I'm gonna reframe it around what I had just realized was this overpowered trope that was popping up in anime. So I wrote that. But then when I started writing that, I felt like I didn't want to focus too far into the overpowered main character trope, especially because there are already so many videos that did a good job analyzing the trope itself. So then I had to rewrite it again. But I finally landed on a version of the script that I liked, so I hope I did a good enough job giving people a new way to think about writing or reading overpowered main characters. Hopefully the Frieren hype isn't as dead as the Atla hype is. I feel like every time I hear something coming out of that camp, whether it's live action or animated, it gives me a headache. But as far as these two series go, I love both of them, and I can proudly say that Yangchen is my favorite Avatar, hands down. That being said, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.